weighed it 17 times in 8 hours. Each time, the scale showed a different number. The folder was empty, but it was learning. I know how that sounds, but I've held the documentation in my hands, and the documentation doesn't care how it sounds. My name is Ian Cartwell, and tonight we're opening File 0. The folder arrived at my desk 3 months ago, not through official channels. Those don't exist for documents like this. It came in a plastic shopping bag left on my doorstep by someone who knew better than to knock. Inside, wrapped in yesterday's newspaper, was a manila folder so old the edges had gone soft like fabric. The label was handwritten in faded blue ink. Object 0, KGB Archive, 1967. Someone had translated it on a yellow sticky note. The folder was empty. But here's what made me keep it instead of throwing it away with the rest of the week's junk mail. The folder was warm. Not room temperature warm. Body temperature. Like it had just been held by someone with a fever. I've been doing this work for 11 years now. I've read files about things that shouldn't exist, written by men who wished they didn't. You develop instincts. And my instincts told me that an empty folder doesn't stay warm for 3 hours after you've left it alone on a metal desk. The actual documents weren't in the folder. They were underneath it, sealed in a separate evidence bag. Photocopies, of course. The originals are somewhere I'll never be allowed to see. The page quality is poor, 3rd or 4th generation copies, but the words are clear enough. The header reads, Internal Investigation Report, Unusual Material Properties, Object 0, Classification, Absolute Isolation. It's dated March 1967, compiled by a KGB Technical Research Division I've never heard of before. Division 12. The kind of division that doesn't appear in any organizational chart. The report begins with an apology.
This investigator acknowledges the apparent absurdity of the following account. All measurements were verified by independent observers. All equipment was tested and recalibrated. The facts remain unchanged regardless of their impossibility.
In February of 1967, a routine filing audit was conducted at a KGB documentation center outside Sverdlovsk. These audits happened quarterly, checking that classified folders matched their content logs, that nothing had been removed or misfiled. Bureaucracy, even in the Soviet intelligence apparatus, required constant feeding. The auditor's name was Dmitry Volkov, 43 years old, married, 2 children, a career administrator who'd never worked in the field, never carried a weapon, never interrogated anyone. He counted folders for a living. On February 14th, at approximately 2 in the afternoon, Volkov discovered a folder that wasn't on any list. It was filed between 2 agricultural reports, data on wheat yields and fertilizer distribution. The kind of mind-numbing material that filled 80% of any Soviet archive. But this folder didn't match. It was older than the others, the color slightly wrong, and it had no label. Volkov pulled it from the shelf. The report notes that he immediately felt its weight was incorrect. Too heavy for an empty folder, but when he opened it, nothing inside. He checked the pockets, the seams. Empty. He set it on the desk and continued his audit. When he returned to it 20 minutes later, intending to flag it for disposal, he noticed something. The folder had moved. Not far. Maybe 2 inches to the left. But Volkov was certain, absolutely certain. He'd placed it square in the center of the desk. He was that kind of man, the kind who lined up his pencils and kept his lunch in labeled containers. He picked up the folder again. It was lighter now. I want to pause here because this is where most people would stop believing the story. A folder that changes weight? It sounds like a magic trick, like something from a circus act. But here's what you need to understand about Soviet documentation. These people didn't write reports about magic tricks. They barely had time to write reports about actual intelligence operations. When a KGB technical researcher sits down and types out 17 pages about an object that defies physics, he's not doing it because he wants attention or because he's mentally unwell. He's doing it because he's terrified of what happens if he doesn't document it properly. Fear makes people precise. Volkov reported the anomaly to his supervisor, a woman named Kovalenko. The report describes her as skeptical but thorough. She examined the folder herself, noted its unremarkable appearance, and told Volkov to weigh it. They used a standard postal scale, the kind that measured in grams, accurate to within 2 grams. First measurement, 433 grams.
Weigh it again.
Second measurement, 433 grams. She had him weigh a different folder for comparison, 112 grams. Then back to the anomalous folder. Third measurement, 430 grams. Kovalenko was about to dismiss the whole thing. Slight variation in scale calibration. Nothing unusual when Volkov pointed out something she'd missed. The folder was lighter than it had been 5 minutes ago. Not by much, 3 grams, but the scale was consistent with itself. The folder's weight was decreasing in real time, slowly, like air leaking from a tire. Kovalenko ordered the folder sealed in a plastic bag and transported to Division 12. She didn't know what Division 12 did exactly, but she knew they dealt with irregularities. The investigation proper began on February 16th. 3 researchers, whose names are redacted in the documents I have. They're referred to only as Researcher A, Researcher B, and Researcher C. They placed Object 0 on a precision scale in a sealed room. Temperature controlled, humidity controlled, no air currents, the kind of environment where you could measure the weight of dust. They recorded measurements every 30 minutes for 6 hours. The numbers are included in the report. I've copied them here. Hour 1, 411 grams, 407 grams. Hour 2, 402 grams, 396 grams. Hour 3, 391 grams, 383 grams. Hour 4, 375 grams, 368 grams. Hour 5, 359 grams, 351 grams. Hour 6, 343 grams, 334 grams. A steady decline. The folder was losing approximately 12 grams per hour.
It's desiccation, moisture evaporating from the paper. The room's humidity is stable. Even if the paper were completely drying out, it couldn't account for this rate of loss. What happens when it reaches 0?
They continued measurements overnight. By morning, the folder weighed 217 grams, still declining, still steady. At this point, Researcher A decided to open the folder and examine the interior more carefully. The report notes that all 3 researchers were present, and all 3 confirmed the folder was empty. No hidden compartments, no residue, nothing unusual about the paper quality. But when Researcher A closed the folder and returned it to the scale, the weight jumped. 512 grams. They weighed it again immediately. 509 grams. And dropping.
The folder resets when observed internally.
Over the next 4 days, they tested this repeatedly. Every time they opened the folder to look inside, the weight would jump to somewhere between 500 and 520 grams. Every time they closed it, the weight would begin declining again at roughly the same rate. 12 grams per hour, like clockwork.
The breathing rate. The folder inhales when you look inside it, exhales when you look away.
On the 5th day, they tried something different. They placed a single sheet of blank paper inside the folder before closing it. The weight immediately jumped to 940 grams. They opened it. The paper was still there, blank, unremarkable. They closed it again. The weight began declining, but faster now, 23 grams per hour.
The object appears to be consuming the paper's mass. Hypothesis. Object 0 is not losing weight. It is transferring weight. Destination unknown.
They removed the paper. The folder's weight reset to its usual range. They tried other materials. A paperclip, a photograph, a drop of water on a glass slide. Each time, the weight would increase proportionally to what they'd added, and each time, the rate of decline would increase. The paperclip took 8 hours to disappear, not vanish. The paperclip remained visible inside the folder, but the weight it contributed gradually transferred away until the scale read as if the paperclip wasn't there at all. When they removed it and weighed it separately, the paperclip was lighter, measurably lighter. It had lost approximately 40% of its mass. The photograph took longer, 31 hours. When they removed it, the image had faded slightly, like it had been left in sunlight for years. The water evaporated normally, or seemed to, but the glass slide lost mass even after the water was gone.
Object 0 is not a container. It is a mechanism. Purpose unknown. Function extraction.
On February 23rd, 9 days into the investigation, researcher C made an error. He left his pen inside the folder overnight. By morning, the pen weighed 32 grams instead of 47. The ink inside had turned pale, almost translucent. When he tried to write with it, nothing came out. Not because the ink was gone, because the ink had lost its properties. It was still liquid, still visible, but it no longer adhered to paper. The pen had been drained of something fundamental, not mass exactly, something deeper. Researcher C placed the pen in a sealed container for observation. Over the next week, the pen continued to degrade. The plastic became brittle. The metal clip corroded. By March 2nd, the pen had crumbled into powder. The report notes that researcher C refused to enter the laboratory after this incident. He was reassigned to administrative duties and does not appear in any further documentation. With the team down to 2 researchers, Division 12 made a decision. They would test Object Zero's limits. On March 4th, they placed a live white mouse inside the folder. I need you to understand, these were not cruel people. They were scientists operating under the assumption that understanding this object was more important than ethical boundaries. That assumption was probably correct. They placed the mouse in a small wire cage to prevent it from escaping, then set the cage inside the folder and closed it. Initial weight, 703 grams. They monitored it continuously. After 1 hour, the weight had dropped to 698 grams. Normal breathing rate, adjusted for the mouse's mass. After 3 hours, 671 grams. After 6 hours, 622 grams. They opened the folder. The mouse was alive, moving normally, no signs of distress. They removed it immediately and placed it in a standard observation cage. The mouse died 4 hours later. The necropsy, conducted by a veterinary consultant, found nothing. No disease, no injury, no poison. The organs were intact, the tissues unremarkable, but the mouse was dead.
Cause of death unknown. Animal appears to have simply stopped, as if it forgot how to be alive.
After the mouse incident, all biological testing was suspended. But researcher A had become obsessed. His notes from early March show increasingly erratic handwriting, unusual phrasing. He was asking questions the original investigation hadn't been designed to answer.
Where does the mass go? What is on the receiving end of this transaction? If Object Zero is extracting something, what is being extracted to?
On March 9th, against protocol, researcher A stayed late in the laboratory alone. Security footage, referenced but not included in my documents, shows him entering at 9 p.m. He's carrying something. The report describes it as a personal item of unknown significance. At 9:43 p.m., he opens Object Zero and places the item inside. At 9:44 p.m., he closes the folder. At 9:46 p.m., he sits down at his desk and waits. At 11:17 p.m., he stands up, walks to the scale, and picks up the folder. At 11:18 p.m., he opens the folder, looks inside, and screams. Security arrived within 3 minutes. They found researcher A unconscious on the floor. Object Zero open beside him. Empty. Whatever he'd placed inside was gone. Not diminished like the other objects, but completely absent. Researcher A was hospitalized for observation. He remained conscious but unresponsive for 6 days. On March 15th, he began speaking again, but only to repeat the same phrase.
It showed me where it goes. It showed me where it goes. It showed me where it goes.
He was discharged from Division 12 on March 20th with a medical classification that prevented him from ever working in a classified environment again. The final entry in the report is dated March the 21st, 1967. Researcher B, now working alone, compiled his findings.
Object Zero displays properties inconsistent with known physics. It does not violate conservation of mass, but appears to relocate mass through an undetectable medium. Attempts to measure this medium have failed. Hypothesis: Object Zero is not the anomaly. Object Zero is a symptom of the anomaly, a visible manifestation of a process occurring in a parallel or intersecting space. Recommendation: permanent isolation, no further testing. Object is to be stored in a sealed container, unopened, until such time as theoretical physics can provide a framework for understanding its function. Additional note: this researcher has developed persistent headaches and visual disturbances since March 9th. Request immediate reassignment.
The report ends there. There's one more document in the evidence bag. A single page dated 1983, 16 years after the original investigation. It's a storage inventory from a KGB warehouse facility. Among thousands of items, there's an entry for Object Zero. It lists the container type, the shelf location, the security classification, and it lists the weight. 0 grams. Not empty. The container itself would have weight. The entry specifically notes Object mass 0.0 grams. Container integrity intact. Contents unknown. Someone had weighed the folder inside its sealed container and found that it had completed its transaction. It had given away everything it had. But here's what keeps me awake. The folder still exists. It's still in storage somewhere. Still empty, still sealed, still waiting. I've tried to verify this story through other channels. I've contacted 3 researchers who specialize in Soviet scientific programs. None of them had heard of Division 12. One of them, a woman who spent 30 years studying KGB documentation procedures, told me something interesting.
In the Soviet system, objects were sometimes classified not by what they were, but by what they prevented you from understanding. If you encountered something that challenged your framework of reality, the safest option wasn't to destroy it. It was to isolate it, to prevent it from contaminating other people's certainty. They didn't seal these things away because they were dangerous. They sealed them away because they were contagious. Once you knew they existed, you couldn't unknow it. And uncertainty is more dangerous than any weapon.
I'll tell you what bothers me most about File 0. It's not the impossible physics, it's not the missing mass or the dead mouse or researcher A screaming in an empty room. It's the fact that the folder was empty when Volkov found it. Which means at some point, before it entered the KGB archive, someone had already opened it. Someone had already looked inside and seen whatever researcher A saw. And that person made the decision to file it away between agricultural reports, unlabeled, waiting for someone else to discover it. Who was that person? What did they see? And why did they think hiding it in plain sight was the safest option? The folder on my desk, the physical one that arrived 3 months ago, is still warm. I haven't opened it. I'm not going to open it. But I've been weighing it. 3 times a day, same scale, same conditions. The numbers are consistent. Yesterday, 412 grams. Today, 409 grams. Tomorrow, we'll see. This is Ian Cartwell, closing the file on Object 0. Some archives keep secrets. Some secrets keep you. And some folders are lighter than they should be because they're not holding anything in. They're letting something out. Sleep well.